I really wish I didn't have to keep coming to the defense of President Donald Trump, but apparently I'm going to have to do it again. I swear to God, this is going to be a long 4 years.
Look at what's happening in Germany. You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. They took in large numbers. They're having problems like they never thought possible.
Last night in Sweden. So these 4 words were deliberately misrepresented by the mainstream and the press on TV and by his opponents all over social media as him referring to a terrorist attack, a specific attack that must have taken place in Sweden the night before the rally. They said Trump makes reference to a non-existent terrorist attack, except how did you glean that from these 4 words?
Last night in Sweden.
Last night in Sweden. Well, if you know anything about Sweden and its massive crime problems as a result of mass, unfiltered immigration and multiculturalism, then you'd know that last night in Sweden is pretty much every night in Sweden, especially in Malmö. I'm going to get into all of this because it seems based on the Twitter engagement that I've read and the comments of certain YouTube videos on this subject, his opponents in America are totally unaware of what's happening in Europe and especially in Sweden. So while regressives and, let's call them illiberals, are standing around at anti-Trump rallies with signs saying, "I'm a Muslim too," protesting the travel ban, and listening in respectful deference to Allahu Akbar, just like the feminists at the Women's March, by the way. You just can't make this shit up. You can't make it up. Right, so while that's happening, parts of Europe, Paris, Brussels, Molenbeek, London, and Berlin, they've become dangerous war zone-like ghettos, basically Islamic-occupied territories. Now, Trump later clarified his statements on Sweden. He was referring to a Fox News report which was from the night before the rally he was speaking at. So last night in Sweden probably should have been last night I saw a report about Sweden. Now, the reality is the remark may have misled some people, but it was based on actual facts.
Well, in Sweden's own words, they consider themselves to be a humanitarian superpower. They feel it's their moral duty to open their borders to all and any refugees that want to come to them. It's difficult to get jobs. There's too many of them, but they have tremendous benefits there, which is why so many of these migrants are going to Sweden to begin with. There was an absolute surge in both gun violence and rape in Sweden once they began this open door policy. They know that this crime is happening. They can feel it. The statistics are clear. But they would refer to what is the root cause behind it and say, oh, it's just more, it happened to be more violence. It's men who are raping people, not the refugees. They'll make excuses for it. So they have these, and what they really become are no-go zones. These are areas that cops won't even enter because it's too dangerous for them. This is the policy of the National Police Authority in Sweden, that the government has gone out of its way to try to cover up some of these problems.
Sweden has succumbed to pathological altruism and extreme white guilt. Their politicians are filled with such progressive self-hatred that they feel Sweden belongs to the immigrants and not the Swedish people now. Importing people from cultures with entirely antithetical beliefs on women's rights, for example, and the rule of law in general, has become such an issue for Sweden that it's now the rape capital of Europe. They have segregated swimming pools in certain regions, and they've even asked people with second summer homes if they would open them up to the migrants because they can't house them all. It's insane. The following is from the Gatestone Institution. 40 years after the Swedish Parliament unanimously decided to change the formerly homogenous Sweden into a multicultural country, violent crime has increased by 300% and rapes are up by 1,472%. Sweden is now number 2 in the list of rape countries. Significantly, the report does not touch on the background of the rapists. One should, however, keep in mind that in statistics, second-generation immigrants are counted as Swedes. In an astounding number of cases, the Swedish courts have demonstrated sympathy for the rapists and have acquitted suspects who have claimed that the girl wanted to have sex with 6, 7, or 8 men. Now, there was a radio station that questioned several newspapers in Sweden, I can't pronounce the names of any of them, and they asked why the perpetrators were described as Swedish men when they were actually Somalis without Swedish citizenship. They were hugely offended when asked if they felt any responsibility to warn Swedish women to stay away from certain men. One journalist asked why they should have that responsibility. I mean, what, to report the truth? Unbelievable. According to figures published by the Swedish National Council for Crime Prevention, an agency under the Ministry of Justice, 29,000 Swedish women during 2011 reported that they had been raped, which seems to indicate that less than 25% of rapes are reported to the police. Strange explanations. Rather than doing something about the problem of violence and rape, Swedish politicians, public authorities, and media do their best to explain away the facts. Here are some of their explanations. Swedes have become more prone to report crime. The law has been changed so that more sexual offences are now classed as rape. Swedish men cannot handle increased equality between the sexes. Unbelievable, just blame it on men. Between the sexes and react with violence against women, perhaps the most fanciful excuse. Yeah, I mean, that is a pure feminist excuse if ever I heard one. A long-held feminist myth is that the most dangerous place for a woman is in her own home, that most rapes are committed by someone she knows. This claim was, of course, refuted in a report by, I can't pronounce that either. In 58% of cases, the perpetrator was entirely known by the victim. In 29% of cases, the perpetrator was an acquaintance. Oh, anything then to really recognize the truth. And in 13% of cases, the perpetrator was a person close to the victim. Now, Bra reports that there are no major differences between women of Swedish and foreign background when it comes to the risk of being raped. Significantly, the report does not touch on the background of the rapists. Sweden's government, and indeed it appears many of its citizens, remain in denial about the extent of the problems, which include significant and unsustainable drains on their welfare system, and the police now denying journalists access to information regarding the links between criminality and recent immigrants. I'm reading more and more stories like this. A recent refugee getting away with rape. This guy raped a 12-year-old girl because he claimed he was a minor, so he got away with it. He basically got community service. He was actually over the age of 18. As the angry foreigner in Sweden explains, this madness is fueled by a government that is so afraid to offend that it will deny the obvious reality of a person's actual age, believing them to be a child when they're clearly in their 20s or 30s or 40s.
Sweden felt it was racist to do age tests when we got so-called refugee children who looked like they're freaking 40 years old. And in one case, this even had a deadly outcome. I'm sick of this moronic idea that you're a racist because you like law and order. How can these people think it's inherently immigrant to not have ID papers? That's really the racism of low expectations. And don't even get me started on the rape. We had one case, there was a brutal gang rape. Really savage, sadistic gang rape. Where Interpol said that the guys were well above 18. One of them was said to be 30. And these guys just said that they were under 18. And one of them walked free. The others got less than a year in juvie. Not even prison, but juvenile detention.
The police are handing out "Don't Touch Me" bracelets to Swedish women as a deterrent to stop rapists. Shockingly, this doesn't seem to have the desired effect of stopping the rapes. Recently, a top veteran police officer in Sweden has come forward to blow the whistle on the devastating effects of mass immigration on Sweden, with 130,000 people signing a Facebook page in support. They're calling this the Swedish Spring. Donald Trump is absolutely correct to call out Sweden as a kind of canary in the coal mine for other Western nations who also engage in this open border policy. And it's an example of what happens when politicians betray their citizens, kowtow to political correctness and multiculturalism, and just throw open their borders. In conclusion, Donald Trump is right about Sweden, and the mainstream media misrepresented him and downplayed his remarks because they don't want to admit that he could possibly be correct about anything. If they conducted some basic research and behaved like real journalists, people would know what he's saying is true and worth listening to. But you couldn't have that. His policies, if allowed to be implemented, will keep America from becoming like Sweden. Trump misrepresented once again by the lying fake news media. Just another typical day in the media war. And as I said at the start, if this keeps up, it's going to be a long 4 years.